So we're now in week 4 of our Hesed, right? The Hebrew, getting that back in the throat. That very phlegmy understanding of the everlasting love of God. We actually saw the word in Exodus chapter 20. So we see Hesed throughout the Old Testament. The embodiment of that obviously being Christ. Smallest book of the Bible. That we are in Obadiah, the minor prophet today, talking about a Hesed that defends his people. Okay? And now there's no chapters in Obadiah. It's only one chapter, so we're going to read a variety of verses. But I want to ask the question, not for just for you to think about it, reflect on it. Is there someone in your life, maybe it's you, and again, this isn't a time to nudge the person next to you or push the person in front of you. Don't make it weird. But do you have people in your life that tend to take things very personally, very quickly? Okay, just kind of think about that. Again, don't nod. I've already seen some people look at each other. Okay, it's up. That's on you. But understand that we have a kind of a gauge sometimes in our spirit of, when we take things personally. And some of us, it's kind of a slow cooker, right? It takes a lot for us to really get offended. And sometimes we don't even get up here. We just kind of keep it low. Some of us wake up offended, okay? And everywhere in between. Okay, I saw way more of this after I said it last time, so we should probably just pray, but I will later. But have we ever thought about God taking stuff personally? Yeah, the conversation sure changes, doesn't it? That if God is steadfast and slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, the Psalms tell us that, that's Hesed. Does God take things personally? Well, we just read that I, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities. So, wait, I thought God wasn't supposed to remember our sins. It's a very interesting conversation, isn't it? But I want you to look back at the last week of your life. Would God have taken something that you thought, something you did, something you posted or said? Do you think God would have taken anything you did personally this week? The conversation sure changes, right? Because that is sin. Sin is missing the mark of what God has intended us to do. God can take everything that we do wrong personally. And now I'm going to change the question. When you maybe get offended by somebody, how quick are you to forgive them? How quick are you to judge them? How quick are you to kind of swat that and really make it a bigger issue, a bigger deal? I'm not saying that it's not a big deal. I'm not saying it's a conflict you should avoid. But it's an interesting take when we talk about God taking something personally. Because there are moments in life when injustice, things that we think, things that offend us, when injustice tends to feel unbearable in life. Maybe a moment like someone wronging you. Again, when someone wrongs you, there's a kind of subjective filter that goes through. What might wrong somebody else might not wrong me, or vice versa. How about when someone takes advantage of you? Interesting kind of filter for that, engage for that as well. How about when someone celebrates your pain? I think that's something I'd probably get offended by, right? We even saw that in the baptism, right? 2 of the 3 promised to not beat on Carter too much, right? But there's that one, right? That middle-born. You know who you are. Or someone maybe stands by while you suffer. Maybe you're going through the thick of it, and someone just tends to do nothing. We can take that stuff personally. The hardest part isn't always the pain itself, but it's the feeling that no one sees or no one cares or no one will ever make it right. We see that a lot in the Hollendoner house in the sense of brothers that do tend to beat on each other and do things just to get rise out of each other. And, they understand if we try to make everything right, that would be our full-time job. But how does that feel when you believe no one's going to make the wrongs against you right? It can be a very hopeless, a very lonely, very angry place. But here we have Obadiah, the shortest book in the Old Testament, but it carries one of the most powerful truths in Scripture. And it's about God's Hesed. That God's Hesed does not just comfort his people, God's Hesed defends his people. Ashley, keep that one up there. The word that I think we're all going to disagree on at times is that word defend. Because if we're being honest and someone wrongs us, my guess is we go through a little bit of maybe the 5 phases of that offense, and a lot of us like to stay in the anger mode, right? I'll liken it because it's easy, maybe driving in a car, right? Someone cuts you off, and if we're being honest, there's a little part of you that wishes that God would be more like Zeus and just annihilate that person with a lightning bolt. How many want to raise their hand and own that? Wow, we actually have people. Let me write those names down. But we kind of want that ultimate judgment, right? Even if maybe they didn't cut you off, but they got in your lane 200 yards in front of you, but you took that as cut off, and you go, God, take them anyway, right? We kind of have our own filter for that. That's not the kind of defending we're talking about. Because Hosea taught us that God pursues us when we wander. Joel taught us that God restores us after devastation. Amos last week taught us that God reshapes our lives with justice. But Obadiah teaches us something new today. God does not ignore those who harm his covenant family. He takes it personally. God does not ignore those who harm his covenant family. He takes it personally. So let's dive in to kind of this quick story of Obadiah, right? The backstory, these brothers turned enemies. To understand Obadiah, we must go back to Genesis, but let's go to Obadiah 10 and 11. Again, there's no chapters. Yeah, so harm is covenant family. He takes it personally. And so that first point is kind of the backstory, brothers that turned enemies. Again, it's all in chapter 1 because there's only one chapter. Obadiah 10 and 11. Because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. So a little bit of kind of historical context. Obadiah's prophecy is directed at Edom, E-D-O-M, the nation descended from Esau, Jacob's twin brother. So we're going back to Genesis. This is not just political conflict. This is family betrayal. Now, I say that, and I know that there's a handful of families in this church that have felt that directly. Some that are still within this church. Some that they know that all too well. You see, for centuries, Edom refused Israel's passage through their land. Edom allied with Israel's enemies. Edom harbored resentment and pride. And Edom awaited for Israel's downfall. Okay, this is history. The breaking point comes when Jerusalem falls, roughly, we believe, 586 BC. But instead of helping these related nations, instead of helping, Edom rejoices, Edom loots, Edom captures fleeing refugees, and Edom hands them over to their enemies. Obadiah describes this with chilling clarity. We just read it, but Obadiah 11. On the day that you stood aloof, you were like one of them. This is not just violence, okay? This is cruel indifference. And what do we hear God say? God says, I saw it, I remember it, and I will deal with it. So let's pause there. It's a pretty big kind of setup there. There's a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of rejection, a lot of breaking of relationship ties. And for some of us, we know what that feels like. Maybe not in a grand nation against nation way, but maybe interpersonally. Maybe in a marriage. Maybe in a relationship with family. Maybe in a job. That some of these feelings have been done to us. Before we get to the restoration, we need to point out the sin one more time. The sin of Edom, which was pride, violence, and the very, very dangerous apathy. And so we see this in Obadiah verse 3. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts on the rock, in your lofty dwellings, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? Edom's downfall begins with pride. It says it in Proverbs. We believe it even today. Pride cometh before the... They lived in rocky mountain fortresses. They believed they were untouchable. Pride makes people think they are immune to accountability, that they are beyond judgment, and they are self-sufficient. Now, some of you are going, time out, Pastor, being self-sufficient is a good thing. Absolutely it is, right? Being tenacious, being a self-starter, entrepreneur, all of that good stuff. What this self-sufficiency was is placing their self-sufficiency over others, right? My self-sufficiency is going to be over you even if it causes you pain. But pride always produces fruit. The question today is it good fruit or is it bad fruit? So let's look at the threefold sin of Edom, right? So the threefold sin. First, prideful self-trust. They trusted geographically instead of on God. They trusted their surroundings. They trusted what they built up over their trust in Yahweh. Their second sin, violent participation. They didn't just watch Israel fall, they joined in on the destruction. Guilty by association, we hear in our lifetime, right? Whether that was you as a kid making fun of the other kid, or being in the group that made fun of the other kid at school, or some kind of silent coup that goes on at your job that you don't speak against, even though it's wrong. Prideful self-trust, violent participation, and heartless indifference. Church, this is a tough one. This is a tough one. They exploited suffering instead of showing mercy. Obadiah lists their sins in verses 12 to 14, but I'm just going to give it to you now. Gloating, looting, cutting off escape routes, and handing survivors over to enemies. God sees all of this. God knows all of this. God is offended by it, and he is not vague about this injustice. We see this in our next point, Obadiah 15. As you have done, it shall be done to you. I title this God's Justice, okay? Obadiah 15. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your head. Unfortunately, for Edom and for us, we hear this at times after we've done something. What Obadiah, speaking then to now, 2026, is if you're about to do something, you can stop and not do it. And this won't apply. But for a lot of us, growing up, it could be as small as 5 years old, right? 5 years old in let's say the Bennis house, right? Which one out of the two of you were the cookie eater that really loved the cookies? Yeah, okay. So Taylor really loves the cookies. Mom makes the cookies. Mom says, Taylor, do not eat these until a certain time. Did Taylor eat the cookies prior to that time? I appreciate your honesty, right? You don't know that Riley's the one that told on you, but understand that that could be as small as that. You're being told something to do, you do the opposite, right? Or it could be another household, or another job as we get older. You hear bad things at the water cooler, you do nothing about it because you have this weird understanding that snitches get, wow. That is not at all in the Bible, yet 90% of you knew what that was. The other 10%, you've fallen asleep. Why do we live by prison code in life? Because I'm pretty sure that's where that comes from. Snitches get stitches, said a lot in the Hollendoner house, also prison, okay? We should not abide by that. What God is saying here is because of your actions, there are consequences. I could laundry list, and this is not me getting high and mighty. My sins can be in there too, of Christian leaders, known Christian leaders in our community that fall horribly. And there are consequences. But yet some of us like to think that if I confess my sins, Pastor, you say it all the time. He is faithful. He is just. He'll forgive us my sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Absolutely. But friends, there's still consequences. There are still consequences. This is the moral center of this book. God's judgment is not random. He's not like, and you get the punishment. It's not like a weird Oprah, okay? It is measured. It is fitting. It is just. This isn't revenge. This is righteous reckoning. Here's the thing. God gets to do the reckoning, not us. And for a lot of you, you don't like that I just said that because you want to be the reckoning doer. But vengeance belongs to the Lord, never us. God's justice is not opposed to his Hesed. God's justice flows from his Hesed. And for some of us, we can't reconcile that because we want this hippie-loving Jesus that is never going to have us go through consequences for our wrongdoings, for our sin. That's never how it works. That is never what's in here. That is not how it started in the Old Testament. God just doesn't look away through Jesus. No. Is there forgiveness? Absolutely. Is there restoration? Absolutely. Is there cleansing? Absolutely. But there are also consequences. Why is this? Because God loves his people, because God cares about righteousness, and God refuses to normalize cruelty. Hesed does not mean God looks the other way. Hesed means that God steps in. If you're a parent here this morning, or an aunt or an uncle, and you know when people are just going at it, right? When my boys were younger, it worked a lot more. That all of a sudden, when they were going at it and dad stepped into the room, things stopped, right? Now that my oldest is almost as tall as me, I have to get on my heels, and then I have to enter the room. And hopefully that stature stops it, or the voice stops it. This is where I wish I was like Dan Aardsma, right? Dan's got a foot on me. I would love to walk in a room at, how tall are you? What? He's got a foot and an inch over me. And so I would love to be able to walk into the room. But if I walk in on stilts, are you going to take me seriously? No. You answer that way too quick, Jack. God steps in. Because why? Next point. God defends his people and restores their futures. Obadiah 17. But in Mount Zion there shall be those who escape, and it shall be holy, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. After judgment comes hope. God does not only punish Edom, but he promises restoration to Israel. The restoration promises here are huge. It's deliverance for the remnant always in the Old Testament being Christ, but this is the remnant of that temple, of the relationship with Yahweh. Returning to the land that God gave them, renewal of the covenant blessing, and future victory over oppressors. But then the book ends with a triumphant declaration. And I love this. Obadiah 21. The kingdom shall be the Lord's. It is a wonderful reminder that even though we sin, and even though there are consequences for us that mourn that sin, turn the 180, and follow after Christ, that there is restoration, that it all belongs to God. It's all in his kingdom. That is a good thing for us. Yet for some of us, when we go through that restoration, we really want part of that to be, oh, but God, I really want that pound of flesh. That person really wronged me. I'll forgive them, but I will never forget. Forgive and forget, that's not what we're talking about, right? Because you're also not called to be a doormat. And so if someone does something to you and that trust breaks, it may take a long time to trust that person again. And that's okay. That's you protecting yourself. I get that. But holding that on, and when that person does it again, you rebank that stuff onto that person, that is not forgiveness. The kingdom shall be the Lord's, not ours. This is church language. This is revelation language. This points beyond Edom to Israel. It points beyond Israel to the final triumphant of God's reign. Do you ever think about that? The new heavens and the new earth? Who gets the glory in that? Though we're going to be in our glorified bodies, and I don't know what that means for some of you. I don't know what that means for me. Maybe my glorified body, I am 6'8". I have no idea. But the glory becomes God's because it's always been God's. It's never been ours. Because the Hesed that God gives us preserves us and vindicates us the way God desires, not ours. Right? Vindication, we have certain ways we want to be vindicated. Whether it's that person that cut us off 200 yards away, whether it's that spouse that really hurt us, whether it's the job that was taken away from us, whether the fact that we're the last person to have our driveway plowed by the company we bought or that we paid for. Whatever it is, that point really didn't land when I can't say it out loud. But understand that we want vindication our way. We want to prescribe it. Why in the world would the vindication of the Lord be prescribed through a sinful person? It has to go through the holiness of God. Never us. Never us. Hesed that preserves and vindicates. Not only does Obadiah show us, but the Canons of Dort shows us as well. Grace 101. God's love is not neutral. Canons 1:7. God's love flows from his sovereign, gracious election. That God pursues, that God's love flows for his people. That's why his vindication is the right one, never ours. Because God's vindication doesn't flow through sinful ideology like ours does. It flows from who he is. God does not stand in a distance and watch injustice. He is a covenant God. He chooses his people, and he binds himself to them. Canons 1:7 reminds us again, God's love flows from a sovereign, gracious election. God defends those he has chosen, not because they are perfect, but because he is faithful. Well, God, I really wanted them to be more hurt. I really wanted them to have things taken away like I did. That might not be how God does it. And as followers of God, we need to be okay with that. Grace 201, God preserves his people through oppression. Canons 5:3, God preserves believers so they never fully fall away. Even when Israel was exiled, humiliated, scattered, and wounded, God never abandons his covenant people. Remember the remnant? That remnant is huge. Obadiah reminds us, you may have been wounded, you may have been shaken, you may have been outnumbered, but you are never forgotten. All right, but let's be honest. There are times that we sit there with all this other junk going on around us, and we go, I have been forgotten. God does not see me. He's not helping me the way I want his help. I'm sorry. Do you think when I have to reprimand or punish one of my sons, I look to my other sons to give me like the Roman emperor thumbs up or thumbs down? No. Because a lot of them, it'll be like this, and I don't know what to do with that, okay? No, it's on me and Carrie as the parents to decide. It is. That's the same thing with God. Why? Grace 301, God will vindicate his people. Canons 5:10, the canons teach that God renews confidence, restores hope, and assures believer of the final victory. Obadiah's closing vision points to Christ. The kingdom belongs to the Lord. Guess what? His justice will win, his grace will reign, and God will make all things right the way God has defined it. Why in the world would God look through our right? He wouldn't. He has the right all along. So let's land this plane. What does Obadiah teach us about living out Hesed today? First, that God sees every injustice done to you, all's fair, and every injustice you have done. That's the flip side. But the point is, God sees every injustice done to you. Nothing you suffered has ever been ignored, wasted, or never has been ignored, wasted, or forgiven. Right? Nothing you have suffered. It all is seen by God. God knows it. God's Hesed means to you that your pain matters. That we're going to have perspective in pain. We should find perspective in pain and in disappointment. Your pain matters to God. Second, we must refuse the sins of Edom. Obadiah is not just about Edom's sin, but it's about our temptation to gloat over others' failures, benefit from someone else's pain, remain silent when injustice happens, and choose comfort over compassion. Hesed calls us to intervene, not speculate. To intervene the way God would call you to intervene. How do I know how God's calling me? Read the good book. Read His word. It will help you. Third, the church must be a safe place for the wounded. If God defends His people, then His church must reflect that same heart. Munster Church must be a place where victims are believed, the vulnerable are protected, the hurting are embraced, and injustice is not minimalized. I know that's a big set of phrases. But if we're going to say we're a hospital for the sick and a lighthouse for wayward ships, that's a recognition that we sit in that as well. Victims are believed, the vulnerable are protected, the hurting are embraced, and injustice is not minimized. And don't you dare make that political, because then that's your ideology. It is not mine. It is not this church's. 4, Jesus is the fulfillment of Obadiah's promise. Where Edom crushed God's people, Jesus was crushed for God's people. Where Edom gloated over suffering, Jesus absorbed suffering to save sinners. Where Edom trusted pride, Jesus humbled Himself unto death. And because of Jesus, the kingdom has always and will always belong to the Lord. So friends, in this week, remember that Hesed fights for you. Hosea showed us a God who pursues us. Joel showed us a God who restores us. Amos showed us a God who reshapes us. And Obadiah shows us a God who defends us. If you forget anything else, remember this last slide. God's Hesed means you are never alone in your suffering. God's Hesed means injustice will not win. And God's Hesed means God Himself will fight for you. The final word over your life is not betrayal. It's not injustice, not even loss, because the kingdom shall be the Lord's. Let's pray.